ranking my favorite Godzillas. I think I accidentally wrote strongest in the title, but this isn't ranked off of design, this is just the ones of which I like more. This isn't power scaling. That's what the next one's gonna be. So starting with the original, there's a lot I can say. Hmm. Oh, hmm. Like, yes, it is the starting character of the series, and it's a threat, a devastation of nuclear warfare. The obvious implications of that. But the character itself, is it just a devastation? Which is actually still pretty cool. Alright, so this next interpretation takes a. This next one, which is the second one, takes some. The second, from Godzilla Raids Again, the Godzilla within that film, takes a heavy toll on. I mean, not a heavy toll, but it takes a lot out of dinosaur inspirations. The first film had plenty to do with dinosaurs. Well, it had definitely had that, but this has had a lot to do on dinosaurs trying to figure out that what this thing is as a creature, which introduced the fact that Godzilla is just an animal compared to the last one, which is a force of nature and the consequences of our actions. I assume this is the Godzilla. Well, I don't assume. This is the Godzilla within Godzilla vs. Mothra. And within the film itself, Godzilla's Godzilla isn't necessarily weak. Like, he doesn't. I mean, he's. A lot of people say that he's played out as if he's weak, but he's fighting a magical being, and this is super early on in the Godzilla franchise. I think it was portrayed pretty well. It was a nice Godzilla. This was the Godzilla in Godzilla vs. King Kong. Yes, he did have, like, uh, weakness to electricity and all that. So did the prior Godzillas. This wasn't anything new. And he had some wonderful action scenes. As weird as the Showa era is, it has some amazing films. Now on to Godzilla from Ibara Horror of the Deep. I think Godzilla was portrayed pretty well here. Actually, I'm gonna put this one also in A tier due to the fact that, like, actually, no, this isn't the Godzilla from Horror of the Deep. This is the one from Son of Godzilla. He was still portrayed pretty well here. I'm gonna put him above the Mothra versus Godzilla interpretation because within Son of Godzilla, it does interpret the idea of Godzilla being a father figure, which is actually really cool in some of the future films, especially in my opinion, in Godzilla versus Destroyer. But we'll get back to that interpretation later on. And it also has some. He also has some pretty cool scenes, like fighting the Carmacarus. Fighting Kamanga was pretty cool. Actually, no, I think. Hold on, I think this is the one from Son of Godzilla. With him here, and this one is. Okay, I think I got this one right the first time. Uh, is this the one from Ibara Horror of the Deep right here? Because if it is, I'm putting them there. I haven't watched the Showa era films since last year. I'm going to say that this one's the one from Godzilla vs. Hedorah. Pretty sure. And this Godzilla was a very good interpretation. It was his first, like, defending nature aside from like the original Godzilla, but he was fighting a monster of pollution, which really pushed the idea of him being a defender of nature and all that. And I also like that Son of Godzilla started the trend of Godzilla being. Well, he didn't start. I don't think it started that. I'm pretty sure that was started by the one in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Actually, I'm going to put this interpretation of Godzilla in S tier. Because this. Actually, hold on. Is this the same one? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's the same one. But essentially, this Godzilla was, other than the fact that it had the very well-known scene of why would we help humans, when Mothra was sent out to ask for Godzilla and Rodan's help. We all know about that. But that and the action scenes of fight the first Godzilla that ever fought Ghidorah, and the first Godzilla that also fought Rodan. For those reasons, I put in this Godzilla in S tier. Most of the other ones don't have too much to say, so I'm going to skip over some of them. And this is the Godzilla within Godzilla vs. Megalon. What do you mean? What do you mean? That's strange. What just happened? Anyways, within Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, there's this Godzilla. Well, this is all so far just Showa Godzilla. But within Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, Godzilla is portrayed really well. Like, people think he's this ancient destroyer because of, like, a prophecy. And then all sorts of stuff ends up happening. It's actually really cool. For starters, Mechagodzilla's the obvious suit that Anguirus saw through. That was probably my favorite part of the film. But then when it was cool seeing the people's reactions when seeing Godzilla fight Godzilla, stuff like that. Then within Terror of Mechagodzilla, Godzilla in this film was pretty cool. All things considered, he was. What I have to say most particularly is the fact that in Terror of Mechagodzilla, it was a kind of strange how the fights played out, but Godzilla himself was doing quite well. And now, onto, I don't know what I'd say about Hanna-Barbera Godzilla. Personally, I really like this interpretation of the character. It's pretty straightforward for a kid show and all that. Awesome and all that. But what I'd have to say, other than the fact that I watched the show when I was younger, it's a good show. And Godzilla's interpretation, although is very unique and very different from the typical Godzilla, it's a pretty good Godzilla. Now on to Godzilla in Godzilla 84. This is one of my, not one of my favorites, but we're getting there. So, in Return of Godzilla, Godzilla is this, yes, he's still a force of nature, but he's also an animal at the same time, like he should be, or like by the idea of Godzilla, what it's turned into. And Godzilla, also you know that he's an animal due to his behavioral patterns by following birds for some sort of travel patterns. And then we still know that he's a force of nature due to the worrying and the fact that the original Godzilla is still canon to like the events of the original Godzilla are still canon to the events of 84. Now we have Godzilla as portrayed in Godzilla vs. Biollante. This we're still getting closer to my favorite Godzilla. Well, one of my favorites. But Heisei in this film was portrayed really well as something that people thought needed to be stopped, and just an animal. Like, yes, he is a creature, he's a very powerful beast, but all of the crazy chaos, like, not chaos, but like devastation he causes is regular behavioral patterns and all, just like this one in the last film. And he had some really, really good scenes. Moving on to the interpretation within Godzilla vs. King Ghidorah. This right here has to be one of my favorite Godzilla films. In fact, this is my fourth favorite Godzilla film. However, mostly because of the fact that it's one of the only political Godzilla films out there, but mostly because this Godzilla had the most connection back to World War II about this one guy, this one particular guy who was in World War II, and he was saved by Godzilla. Well, what he believed to be Godzilla, the Godzillosaurus. And all the crazy, like, turns and stuff that are taken because of this Godzilla. People tried to erase him from history and whatnot. Which, also, he has, like, some of the absolute best action scenes, in my opinion. Alright, now moving on to Mothra versus Godzilla. This interpretation was just a monster. Like, yeah, it's still Godzilla, we know that. But he was, like, these fairies showed up, told people that, well, yeah, they still thought this, even before the twin fairies showed up. This was still seen as something that needed to get rid of. And guess what? Godzilla being Godzilla is not gotten rid of. At all. Ever. Which still makes him, like, I'd put him here. This is why I put him in A tier. And now, we have Godzilla versus Space Godzilla. This one is the perfect balance of... Actually, no, this is Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2, which is still one of my favorite interpretations of Godzilla, because it's dealing into the psychic connections, kind of like this one was, but I didn't mention that because it's a lot more prominent in Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla 2. Also, Godzilla's dynamics to Rodan, both being parental figures of sorts to little Godzilla at the time, or being like protectors of little Godzilla and stuff like that. Within this film, I'd say S tier Godzilla. Now we have Space Godzilla. We have Godzilla versus Space Godzilla. Heisei Godzilla in this film was... This is probably this is my Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla is my fifth favorite film ever. And in this film, it shows the only time Godzilla's ever had a parental rage, except potentially in the film prior, technically. But he's shown the most parental rage in this, excluding the film right after the fact that we'll get to, like, very, very shortly. But he had some of the best action scenes. Most particularly, in my opinion, the fact that it's like the obvious thing of he sees the villain causes problem, he's bested by the villain. Space Godzilla shows up, kidnaps little Godzilla, and Godzilla fails to stop him. Godzilla then, like, travels across most of the planet searching for Space Godzilla for obvious reasons. And while doing this, even, like, for once, Japan is on Godzilla's side about something because Space Godzilla is causing way more havoc than Godzilla typically does. And now we move on to one of the absolute best interpretations of Godzilla, in my opinion, of course. But Burning Godzilla, originally, he was given too much energy at once. Although the world would be dead if he wasn't given this much energy, like the amount of monsters Godzilla stopped over this course of time, but all of this energy that made Godzilla technically a hero is making him a bigger threat than any of those things ever were. Because if he gets too much energy, we know the obvious, he'll melt down and the planet will literally die. However, this shows Godzilla's psychic connections as well, due to the fact that towards the end of the film, it's stated that it's the only time Godzilla has ever cried because of Godzilla Jr.'s death at the hands of Destroya, and Godzilla vs. Destroya had some of the absolute best action scenes. Like, aside from Godzilla himself, Destroya as, like, his aggregate forms was such a good take. Like, that was the best thing for a Godzilla horror movie, even though Godzilla wasn't the horror monster technically. But I'd say it's a better film than Godzilla Minus One, in my opinion. Actually, I think we'll get to Godzilla Minus One later on. But now we move on to Godzilla 1998. And I like this Godzilla a lot more than most of you probably think I would. Right next to Godzilla 84. Because of the fact that, well, Godzilla himself isn't that good of interpretation. He has some really good, well, not as good as plenty of the other Godzillas here, but he's got good action scenes. And he also has what I like to call, what's the word for this? Like, yeah, he's very unique, is pretty much what I'm trying to say. Like, he's such a out there interpretation of the character. It's just a good monster film, mostly. Like, yeah, it's very wild and different from Godzilla, like Hanna-Barbera Godzilla, but it's still a wonderful monster movie. And now we have Godzilla Jr. from Godzilla the series. That used to be my favorite interpretation of Godzilla ever when I was like, what, 5? And for at least good enough reasons. This is, well, he has plenty of good action scenes. He has good plot, mostly because of the fact that, well, yeah, it's a kid's show, but it's probably the best Godzilla kid show there is. Like, there's so many things I could say about writing, but mostly it's just, like, it's cool. That's really what it is. It's just cool, like, out there ideas that were closer and to Godzilla than the previous one was. And it was just better. It took on the sci-fi act of what Godzilla did, most particularly in the Heisei era up to this time. And now we have Godzilla 2000. This ought to be one of my favorites. I'm putting him in A tier because of the fact that, yeah, he's an unusual Godzilla, but this also introduced Godzilla's regeneration factor, as well as, like, this didn't introduce this, but it did have a good aspect of humans trying to understand Godzilla to a very big degree. Then we have Godzilla as seen in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. In a lot of films, Godzilla is, well, just Godzilla. You're just supposed to know that. Like, he's a creature, and he's such a devastation to Japan that they're always trying to get rid of him, no matter how many times he saves them. Just like in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. So Gira Goji does, first of all, he has the really, really cool fact of he took a black hole gun to the face, which is honestly just really funny to bring up, as well as the fact that he had kind of a funny-ish scene when he was fighting with the Meganula, or the, like, the smaller bug creatures that he was fighting up against before the Megaguirus was fully there in the film, which was actually really cool. Actually, a lot of people I know say that that was a pretty good film, and it is. But Godzilla particularly awesome. And now we have Godzilla GMK. Let me explain to you why I really like Godzilla GMK. This is not particularly one of the best Godzillas ever, but it's not far off either. Like, this Godzilla, the obvious people, most people would know this, but he's the original Godzilla possessed by World War II victims and soldiers, claiming vengeance on Japan. And then he fights, like, the craziest guardian monsters. Like, the plot is, can any of the monsters stop him? And then none of them do. And then humans rely on the monsters to finally kill Godzilla themselves. And this is honestly one of the craziest Godzillas because of that fact. Like, the entire plot is them trying to kill Godzilla and the guardian monsters being their only hope. Then the monsters just die against Godzilla. Like, Baragon gets stomped and blown up. Mothra just gets, Mothra goes for a surprise attack and then gets blown up. And Ghidorah got killed twice. Ghidorah got revived and then blown to bits a second time. It's honestly some of the coolest action in some of the Suitmation Godzilla films. But better action in a Godzilla Suitmation film is within the Kiryu saga. Alright, so within the Kiryu saga, there's some absolutely crazy stuff that's going on. But mostly it's the conflict of Kiryu himself. But Godzilla within this story is like a lot closer to Uragoji that we talked about earlier. He causes so much devastation that no matter how many times he saves Tokyo, Tokyo will still seek his destruction because of how much destruction he causes regardless. And within the Kiryu saga specifically, he just has some really cool action scenes. Like, most of it, he's just, like, the main focus of the Kiryu saga is Kiryu himself, the giant mechanized clone of Godzilla, built around the skeleton of the original Godzilla and his complexities and the pilot learning to accept themselves. But Godzilla, to me, is always the focus of those films due to the fact that, well, first of all, it's a Godzilla film. But secondly, in my opinion, he's the coolest aspect of the film. When he shows up, it's always the best scenes for somewhat self-explanatory reasons. Now we have Final Wars Godzilla, who I'm going to put just behind Kiryusakai Godzilla. Last I checked, this is my 8th or so favorite Godzilla. Because I'm not including, like, different iterations of, like, Heisei Godzilla, because otherwise this would be, like, what, 14th favorite? It'd be very different. But Final Wars Godzilla is a good balance between a creature, but also a malevolent defender of nature. And also one of, like, one of the best complexities of this Godzilla is his hatred for mankind. As said at the beginning of the film, humanity caused a great fire on the land, being, obviously, the nuclear bombs. And that is why Godzilla cannot forgive mankind, because they caused devastation. So Godzilla went around destroying cities because he intentionally wanted to get rid of humanity, which is honestly awesome. And then, being a defender of nature, he sets that aside because, well, the Zalians showed up and the other monsters got mind controlled. It has some of the best action scenes in any Godzilla film. In fact, Godzilla Final Wars is my 3rd favorite Godzilla film. What other good Godzilla movies are there? Okay, this Godzilla It's not much to Always Sunny on First Street Godzilla. So I'm gonna put him in C tier just because of the fact that he's just cameo. Like, he's a really good cameo, but it's just a cameo. Now, let's go on to MonsterVerse Godzilla's first appearance. I'm going to be putting this Godzilla in A tier, right next to Godzilla 2000 and Godzilla 84, as well as the original 1998 Godzilla. So this Godzilla starts the idea for the monster starts off the MonsterVerse with Godzilla is a natural defender of the ecosystem, kind of like Final Wars Godzilla was, but within this context, he's just defending his territory and hunting the Mutos within the Godzilla 2014 film, which is why I'm placing him here. He has some pretty good action scenes, as slow as they are and how little screen time he has, which is kind of what's preventing him from being in S tier, but that anyways, moving on to Shin Godzilla. Shin Godzilla is a very unique and wonderful interpretation of the character. However, he's held, again, similar to Godzilla 2014, held back due to lack of screen time. And yes, he does have a really interesting concept. Most of the movie is people. Well, this isn't about the movie specifically, but this ruins away from. The character wasn't well taken into the fact. It's just somewhat disappointing that the film itself didn't take enough care into Godzilla itself. However, the character itself, still wonderfully executed, just didn't have enough execution for me to put him that much higher. Now let's talk about Godzilla Filius. I love this Godzilla solely for the fact. Actually, I'm gonna put this Godzilla higher than these two. But this Godzilla, Godzilla Filius, I love this Godzilla because of the fact that like they're trusting Haruo's crazy plan. Like for the context, they're in space. They've been in space for 20 years, but Earth has aged for 20,000 years. There's the second Godzilla, but they don't know that. They think it's just the Godzilla that caused them to fly into space to begin with and exit Earth. And then they come back and they try to kill Godzilla. They end up killing this Godzilla, but they didn't know that it was just a second weaker Godzilla. And it's so much funnier just seeing Godzilla Earth pop out just moments later, pretty much. So I'm gonna put this Godzilla right here, or right here. Do you guys think I should put him above or below Heisei Godzilla's interpretation within Mothra versus Godzilla? Darn. Well then. Alright. Now, let's talk about Godzilla Earth himself. I'm putting him in A tier due to the fact that this Godzilla is, well, obviously the defender of nature. In the prequel novels, he had some really interesting stuff that happened, really, like the fact that they detonated a ton of nuclear bombs to try to kill him, to vaporize the Bay of Van Gogh. Didn't kill him. He had a ton of references to prior Godzilla media. There's honestly pretty good interpretation, so I'm putting him in this tier. And now, I'm going to be moving on to MonsterVerse Godzilla as seen in Godzilla King of the Monsters. I'm going to be putting him right here, because this Godzilla King of the Monsters is my all-time favorite Godzilla movie. But in this film, he's not my favorite Godzilla. Although it has some of the best action scenes, like probably the best action scenes in any Godzilla film ever, he has a pretty big weakness of, well, semi lack of screen time, as well as the fact that the movie focused a lot on other monsters. But again, this is still peak. This is a peak Godzilla right here, in my opinion, of course. Now let's move on to Godzilla Ultima. I'm going to be putting Godzilla Ultima in A tier, due to the fact that, well, similar to Shin Godzilla, he's just an interesting concept of a character, a unique take on the character that's been, like, pretty much the exact same throughout multiple different things. The Heisei era had such the lasting impact that the Millennium era just went along with the idea that I talked about earlier, that Godzilla causes so much devastation that no matter how many times he saves the Earth or how heroic he may act, he's still a destroyer. And now let's move on to Godzilla and Godzilla vs. Kong. This Godzilla is honestly just... he's a plenty interesting Godzilla. It's still the same Godzilla. Monster vs. Godzilla is like one of my favorite Godzillas. But again, he suffers from one thing in this film. Although I do really like the idea of they think he's a bad guy and they're trying to... and it's all this like scam. They're just trying to kill him because people are afraid that Godzilla's so powerful and the Earth isn't in their control. That the Earth isn't in their control, but in Godzilla's, is actually really interesting. And aside from that, Godzilla does have pretty good action scenes here. I mean, who didn't love the ending of Godzilla vs. Kong, but isn't that much to it. Now let's move on to Gemstone Godzilla. This is probably one of my favorite Godzillas. I'm putting him just above 1990. Actually, I'm putting him below 1998. That's gotta be wildly an unpopular opinion. But darn, that really did get me literally almost instantly to 0 views. That's no fun. I should have seen that coming, but it's only because of the fact that there isn't much to this Godzilla. Like, yeah, sure, he's a really, really good interpretation of the character. He's just there for the action. That's it. Although the action itself is really good, which is the only reason I put him this high. If there was nothing to him, I'd put him in C or D tier. Anyways, now we have Godzilla -1. I'm gonna go real quick to S tier. I'm gonna put him right next to GMK, or yeah, right here. Well, yeah, I should put him higher. So, Godzilla -1. Obviously, the consequences of people's actions, the devastating force of nature, awesome. However, there's one aspect about this, which is holding him back. The fact that he was so villainized, which, yes, is a very important point of this film. However, to the fact of Godzilla himself, that hinders him somewhat. Although Godzilla is kind of there as just a plot point, as cool as he is. Like, they're acknowledging the fact that, yes, he is just a creature and all that. But yeah, goated Godzilla. Wonderful Godzilla interpretation. Dang it, I have nothing. Back to MonsterVerse Godzilla. This Godzilla. Well, Evolved Godzilla? I have to put him right ahead of Zilla Jr. Because of the fact that Evolved Godzilla has, well, first of all, just really good action scenes, wonderful personality, the conflict between him and Kong, again, just really cool. That's kind of it. Why didn't this include the comics? Darn, I should have picked a different tier list. Actually, to the one person watching, say in chat right now, whether or not you think I should pause the live stream and get another tier list to do this exact same thing. Take your time. Darn, he left.